The job paid $12 an hour and it required a pulse. That was about the full extent of the qualifications. I had been out of work for almost 3 months when I got the call from Bev Norris at Crestwood Valley Mall. I had applied to so many jobs by that point that I didn't even remember submitting the application. She left a voicemail while I was asleep, and I called her back from my kitchen while I was still half awake. And 20 minutes later, I had the job. Night security, alone, 6 nights a week. My name is Cal, and I'm 34. I grew up about 40 minutes from Crestwood, and I've been to that mall maybe 100 times in my life. Birthday parties when I was a kid, the arcade in the back corner, and the food court with the little Sbarro that my mom loved. I knew the place the way everybody around here knew it, which is to say that I remembered it the way that it used to be, not the way that it actually was anymore. I drove out from my first shift on a Tuesday in February, and the parking lot alone was enough to get under my skin. It was enormous, built to hold thousands of cars, and there were maybe 30 scattered across it like loose change on a table. Security lights on tall poles cast everything in that yellow-orange glow that makes the world look like an old photograph. The building itself was massive and low and dark, with a few lit signs near the main entrance that buzzed and flickered. And Bev met me at the side entrance. She was a short woman in her late 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a permanent expression of mild exhaustion. She handed me a radio, a flashlight, a key ring with what felt like 40 keys on it, and a laminated sheet with the names and phone numbers of people to call in various situations. She walked me through the rounds, which took about 20 minutes to explain and about 45 minutes to actually complete. The mall had 2 levels. The upper level was where most of the remaining tenants were, mostly clustered near the east entrance. The lower level was storage and maintenance, and it had been mostly off-limits to tenants for going on 2 years due to some drainage issue that Bev described vaguely and moved past quickly. The whole time she was showing me around, I was taking in the place. I hadn't been inside in probably 8 years, and it had changed completely in the way that empty spaces change, which is to say that it had stopped feeling like a place where things happened and started feeling like the memory of one. The storefronts were dark and gutted. Some of them still had signage. A shoe store, a jewelry kiosk with the glass cases still in place, but nothing inside of them. A kid's clothing store with 3 plastic mannequins left behind, still dressed in clothes that had probably been there for 5 years. The main corridor was wide and the ceiling was high, and the skylights were dark with night, and the fountain in the center was dry, and it had been for a long time. And near the east corridor there was a carousel. It was covered with a large tarp, lashed down with bungee cords. Even under the tarp you could see these shapes of the horses, their heads and necks pressing against the fabric. I stared at it for a second, and Bev said, almost to herself, that it had been covered since the spring, and nobody could agree on who was responsible for doing something with it. She also pointed out the old arcade at the back of the upper level, tucked behind where the food court had ended. Galaxy Games, the sign above the entrance still said, though the G had gone dark, so it just read Alexy Games in flickering blue letters. The inside was completely dark. Most of the machines were still in there, she said, because the company that owned them had gone under before they could collect them, and the cost of removing them had become one of those things that nobody wanted to pay for. She pulled the door shut and said that I didn't need to go in there during rounds unless I heard something, and that sometimes the old machines made noise on their own because of the cold. At the end of the walkthrough, she almost forgot to give me the rules. She pulled them out of her desk drawer, a folded piece of paper, and handed it to me the way that you would hand somebody a takeout menu. She said the previous guard had left them and that she thought some of it was a little dramatic, but that it didn't hurt to know them. And then she put on her coat and left. I heard her car start in the parking lot and take off. I unfolded the paper and read it, standing at the security desk. There were 7 rules. They were handwritten in neat, careful block letters, like the person who wrote them had wanted to make sure that they were legible. 1. Do not enter the old J.C. Penney wing after 10 at night. 2. If you hear music from the food court, do not follow it. 3. If somebody waves at you from inside a dark storefront, do not wave back. 4. If you smell popcorn and can't find where it's coming from, sit down wherever you are, close your eyes and count to 60. Do not open them before you finish counting. 5. If you see a child inside the mall at night, call the police right away. Do not approach the child. 6. Stay out of the service corridors behind the stores after 11 at night. 7. Never go to the lower level alone, for any reason. I read it over twice, then I folded the paper and put it in my jacket pocket. I thought the previous guy had probably just worked too many nights alone in a creepy building, and had started filling in the silence with stories. I had done plenty of night shifts at a factory, and there's something about the dark and quiet that the brain doesn't like. It fills in the blanks. It makes things up. That first night was quiet. I did my rounds twice, I drank 2 cups of coffee from a thermos, and I watched half a movie on my phone. I drove home at 6 in the morning with the sky just starting to go gray, and thought about how the job was going to be mostly fine. Now, I want to be precise about when things started feeling different, because it wasn't all at once. The first 4 nights were fairly quiet, but on the 5th night, I smelled popcorn. It was sometime after midnight, and I was on the upper level near the old shoe store when it hit me. It was strong and warm, the way that popcorn smells when you walk into a movie theater. That buttery salt smell that goes straight to some part of your brain that remembers being a kid. I stopped walking. I looked around. There was no source for it. The nearest occupied tenant was a cellular carrier store near the east entrance, and they had been closed since 9 o'clock. I thought about rule number 4. I thought how ridiculous it was. And then I sat down on the edge of the dry fountain, closed my eyes, and I counted to 60. It felt embarrassing, honestly. Sitting alone in a dark mall at midnight with my eyes closed, counting in my head like a child playing hide and seek. I got to 60 and I opened my eyes. The corridor looked the same. Dark storefronts, low light, the tarp-covered carousel down the way. But something felt different in a way that I couldn't explain. The way a room sometimes feels different after you've been in it for a long time. Like the air had settled. The popcorn smell was gone. I finished my rounds and told myself that it was probably just the ventilation system pulling something up from somewhere. Old buildings do weird things. That was what I told myself, and most of me believed it. The music happened on my 9th night. I was in the food court doing my pass-through when I heard it. Soft at first, coming from these ceiling speakers. The kind of music they used to play in malls everywhere. That soft, inoffensive 80s pop that just sort of existed in the background of every shopping trip that you ever took as a kid. I couldn't make out the song at first. I took a step toward the far end of the food court where these speakers seemed to be the strongest. I stopped. I stood completely still and I waited. The music kept playing, faint and smooth and oddly comforting, the way that a familiar smell is comforting. I had the strong urge just to walk toward it, to find the speaker that it was coming from and to figure out what was going on. I mean, there was no reason not to investigate. I was the security guard and that was literally my job. But I had stood in a dark, empty mall at midnight and counted to 60 for no reason. And something had changed when I did. And so I stayed where I was. I stood in the food court with my hands in my pockets, and I listened to that music and didn't move. It played for maybe 4 minutes and then it stopped, right in the middle of a note like somebody had pulled a plug. The silence that replaced it was the kind that presses on your ears. I did the rest of my rounds quickly and I didn't go back to the food court until the next pass, and by then there was nothing. Just the chairs and tables and the long dark shuttered storefronts, and the smell of old grease that had soaked into everything over the decades. On my 11th night, the arcade came alive. I was finishing up the upper level pass, coming around the back end of the food court toward the Galaxy Games entrance, when I saw the light. Not a flashlight, not a thin beam of something that I could explain away. The entire inside of the arcade was flickering, machine by machine, like they were waking up in sequence. The glow coming from the entrance was blue and orange and green, old screen colors, the specific light of a dozen games cycling through their attract modes all at once. I stopped at the entrance. The machines were all going, Pac-Man, Galaga, one of the big racing cabinets near the back wall, a row of pinball machines along the left side, their play fields lit up and bumpers flashing. The sound was low but present. All those digital bleeps and chimes and engine noises layered together into something that should have been familiar but wasn't. It was familiar the way that a word looks wrong if you stare at it for too long. There was no power reason for any of this. The arcade had been disconnected from the tenant power grid when the operator had went under. Bev had told me that herself. But I stood at the entrance and watched the machines run their loops and I thought about the rules. None of them said anything specifically about the arcade. None of them said not to go in, or don't look at the machines, or stay out after a certain time. There wasn't any rule about this, which meant either it had never happened when he was here, or he had never come back from it to write it down. That second thought sat in my chest like a cold stone. I was still standing there when I heard the laughter. It came from the back of the arcade, from somewhere past the racing cabinet and the rows of machines where the lights didn't quite reach. A child laughing, high and clear, the kind of laugh that belongs to somebody who's just won a game or has gotten a good score. The kind of sound that every single one of my instincts said to move toward. I didn't move. The laugh came again, a little closer this time, like whatever was making it had moved up one row of machines. I could hear it picking its way through the arcade, and somehow that was worse than if it had just been stationary. Something was moving in there. Something that knew that I was at the entrance. And then one by one, the machines in the front row of the arcade went dark. And then the second row. Like the light was retreating toward the back, pulling away from me and whatever was in there retreating with it, drawing back, pulling the brightness away from the entrance and deeper into the arcade. I understood what it wanted me to do. It wanted me to walk in after it, follow the light and the laughter deeper into that space until I was far enough in that whatever waited at the back could do what it did. I turned around and I walked at a steady pace. I did not run. No way I was going in there. Behind me for about half a minute, I could still hear the laughter. It didn't sound angry or frustrated. It just kept going, light and easy. The sound of a kid having the best afternoon of their life in an arcade that had been dark and dead for years. By the time that I reached the main corridor, it had stopped. I sat on the edge of that dry fountain again and closed my eyes, and I counted to 60 without anybody telling me to. When I opened them, the mall was quiet. It was still, and I was alone in it. And the corridor back toward the food court was dark the whole way through. I added the arcade to my rounds as a visual check only, from the entrance and never inside. That felt like the right call. And nothing that happened afterward made me think that it was wrong. On the 12th night, I saw the girl. I was doing the East Corridor pass, coming up on the carousel, when I saw her standing about 10 feet from the covered horses. She was small, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a puffy winter coat with a fur-trimmed hood, the kind that used to be popular when I was a kid. She was just standing there with her arms at her sides, facing me. My stomach dropped. There was no reason on earth for a child to be in this building at this hour. I pulled up my phone and called the non-emergency line, like Rule 5 had said to do. I kept my eyes on the girl while I talked to the dispatcher. I told them that there was a child alone in the mall. I gave my location and I stayed on the line. The whole time I watched the girl and she watched me, and neither of us moved. It took Officer Trent about 12 minutes to get there. I know because I was staring at my phone the whole time watching the clock. When I heard the door open and Trent's footsteps in the corridor, I looked away from the girl for maybe 2 seconds. And as you can guess it, when I looked back, she was gone. Trent scoped out the area with me and then did a loop on the main floor and didn't find anything. He was polite about it in the way that people are polite when they think you've wasted their time. He said that kids sometimes go into malls through prompt service doors and that it happened more often than people thought. He said to call back if I ever saw her again. After he left, I stood near the carousel for a long time. The tarp shifted a little in the draft from the heating vents, the horse-shaped lumps underneath pressing against the fabric. 2 nights later, I was sitting in the security office between rounds when I noticed the corkboard on the wall. It was covered in papers and business cards and a couple of printed photos, the kind of thing that accumulates in many offices over the years. I glanced at the photos. Most of them were pictures of the mall from what looked like the 80s or early 90s, the kind of shots you take when you're proud of a place. The mall full of people, the fountain running, the carousel going around and around, bright and lit up. Families all watching it and having a good time. I was almost done looking when I found the one near the carousel. It was a wide shot taken from the East Corridor. In the foreground, a couple of kids were pointing at the horses. In the background, standing just off to the side with her arms at her sides, was a small girl in a puffy winter coat with a fur-trimmed hood. I sat with that photo for a long time. The date printed on the bottom edge said March 1988. I told myself that there were probably dozens of kids who had worn that same coat. I mean, it was pretty popular. It was nothing. But I didn't really believe that. And I think somewhere I'd stopped believing it when the music played and I felt that pull toward the food court and had understood, on some level, that I didn't want to look at it directly, that the pull hadn't been a curiosity. I asked Bev about the previous guard the next afternoon when she was doing a walkthrough of the tenant spaces. She was a practical woman who I had mostly liked up until the moment that I had asked her about Denny Marsh. I had found his name on a laminated employee ID tacked near the security desk. The photo showed a heavy-set man in his mid-40s with a gray beard and a tired, kind smile. He looked like somebody's dad. When I said his name, Bev stopped walking. She didn't look at me right away, and then she said that Denny had been a good employee for 6 years, and that what had happened to him was a tragedy, and that she didn't like to talk about it. I pushed a little gently and she told me the basics. About 18 months ago, the morning crew had come in to find Denny's car in the lot. His round logs were up to date through 4 in the morning. But after that, nothing. No Denny. The police had looked into it for a while and never found an explanation. The case was technically still open. She told me this in a flat, reciting kind of voice, like something that she had said many times and wanted to say as few times going forward as possible. And then she changed the subject and walked me to the east anchor space to talk about a leak in the ceiling tiles, and I let her change the subject because there wasn't much else to say. That night before my shift, I sat in the security office and I looked at Denny's employee photo for a while. A gray beard, a tired smile. 6 years in this building at night, all alone. He had made those rules, every single one of them. And then one night he had been here and then he hadn't been here, and his car was still in the lot. I did my first round that night earlier than usual. The JCPenney wing ran off the south end of the main corridor, a long straight stretch of empty storefronts leading to the old anchor space at the end, which had been gutted and dark for 3 years. It was the part of the mall that felt the emptiest, which was saying something. Even the lighting was worse in there. Some of the overhead fixtures had given out without anybody bothering to replace them. I had been in the wing on my rounds before, but always before 10. Always quick and always in and out. On my 15th night, I was coming up in the entrance to the JCPenney wing at around 10:30 when I saw the figure. It was standing at the far end of the wing, in front of the dark anchor space doors. Too far to make out clearly, but it was human-shaped and facing me, and it was standing still. I realized that I had taken 2 or 3 steps into the wing without deciding to. I stopped. The figure didn't move. It just stood there at the end of that long, dark corridor, and I stood at the near end, and the distance between us was maybe 100 yards of empty mall. I backed out of the wing back into the main corridor, and I stood in the light for a while. My heart was doing something uncomfortable in my chest. After a minute, I thought about what I had seen, about the shape of the figure, the build of the jacket, and I went back to the security office. I looked at Denny Marsh's employee photo. I didn't finish my rounds that night. I sat in the security office until 6 in the morning and I didn't leave it. I want to tell you about the night with the vision because it's the hardest thing to explain. Not because of what I saw, but because of how real it was, and because of how close I came to not coming back from it. It was my 18th night. I was doing a round of the main corridor near the dry fountain. It was late, maybe around 2 in the morning. I was really tired that night, so much so that everything had that slightly unreal quality to it. Pair that with an old abandoned mall and it makes sense. The popcorn smell hit me hard and fast, not gradual like before, but immediate, like walking through a door into a different room. I reached for rule 4 in my head, and I was actually starting to sit down on the edge of the fountain when the mall had changed. I don't have a better word for it, but it changed. One moment I was in the Crestwood Valley Mall of right now, dark and empty and half dead. And then I was transported back to the mall of 1989, and it was 3 in the afternoon on a busy Saturday. The lights were blazing. Every store was open and lit up and full of people. I could hear the fountain behind me, the water running, the coins glinting in it. The carousel was going around and around, horses moving up and down. A little girl in a puffy coat watching it with her hands together. The ceiling speakers were playing something that I remembered from when I was young. One of those songs that just always had been there in the background of your life. The smell of these Sbarro hit me, pizza and garlic, and underneath it, the popcorn from the cart near the east entrance, and the perfume from the department store. All of it together was so specifically right that my chest ached with something that took me a second to recognize as longing. People moved past me. A teenager talking on a payphone near the service corridor. A family with a stroller. The dad holding shopping bags in both hands. 2 older women with mall walker sneakers moving briskly down the corridor. None of them looked at me. None of them reacted to me. But they were there. I could almost feel the air displacement as they passed by. And from the back of the upper level past the food court, the arcade was blazing. Full color, full sound, every machine running. A crowd of kids in acid-wash jeans clustered around the racing cabinets and the pinball machines, their laughter carrying all the way down the main corridor. I could see it from where I was standing, that warm glow, and I wanted to walk to it the way that you want to walk toward a fire in the cold. And deep down I knew that it wasn't real. I want to be clear about that. Some part of me, some small clear part, was screaming that this was not real. But my body didn't know that. My body was already moving, following the flow of foot traffic and drifting east, drifting toward the carousel and the little girl, and the light and the sound of those kids in the arcade laughing at whatever was on the screen in front of them. What brought me back was the tarp. My hand had caught the edge of it, that rough synthetic fabric, and the texture of it was completely wrong for 1989. Wrong for the bright, crowded Saturday afternoon. Wrong for everything that the vision was telling me. I grabbed it hard, got a hold of it, and held on. I closed my eyes and I counted to 60, slowly and carefully, really focusing on each number. I counted past 60 all the way up to 100. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in the dark and empty mall, both hands gripping the tarp over the carousel, and the JCPenney wing entrance was about 30 feet ahead of me. I had walked 30 feet without knowing that I was walking. I sat down on the floor right there in the corridor, and I stayed down until my hands had stopped shaking. Then I got up and went back to the security office, and I sat in there and I thought seriously about how to find a different job. I decided to call it quits the next morning. I know that might sound like the obvious choice looking back, but I had about $200 in my account and no other prospects. And the process of choosing to leave something that you need is more complicated than people who have never been broke understand. But I decided. I would tell Bev at the end of the shift. I would ask for my last paycheck and I would figure out the rest of it. I walked to the parking lot at the end of my shift and I got in my car and turned the key and got nothing. Not a sputter, not a click. Complete silence. The battery was dead. It had been fine the night before, but it was dead now. I called a friend who lived about 25 minutes away and he said that he would come with jumper cables, but that he was still in bed and it would probably be an hour or maybe more. I told him that that was fine. I went back inside because it was February and standing in that parking lot was not an option. I told myself that it was just a fluke. I told myself that these things happen. I was just going to go sit in the security office and wait until my friend was going to come and jump the car, and I was going to drive away from this place and never come back. And that's what I was trying to do. I was sitting in the security office with a cup of coffee watching something on my phone when the music had started from the food court. I turned my phone off and I sat still, and then I smelled the popcorn. And then from somewhere down the back of the upper level, from the direction of the arcade, I heard it. Children laughing, the same way that it had sounded before. That high, easy sound that carried all the way down the corridor and through the walls, and it sat in the middle of my chest like a hand pressing inward. More than one voice this time, a group of them. All three at once, and even though I knew what was happening, even though I understood by now that each one of these things was a lure, a hook designed for a specific instinct, the combined weight of all three was tremendous. My whole body wanted to get up and move, the urge to investigate, to help, to follow the familiar comfort of that smell and that sound. It was almost physical. It pressed on me from all sides. I did not get up. I counted again in my head 3 times in a row, eyes open, staring at the wall across from me. The laughter kept going for a while. It would shift in pitch, sometimes sounding closer and sometimes farther away, like it was moving through the upper level in a slow loop, working its way around the food court, drifting toward the main corridor. I understood that it was testing the distance, seeing how close it could get before I moved. When I finally stopped counting, the laughter had faded, but the smell of popcorn was still there, faint but present, like it was still waiting. And then something moved past the window of the security office. The office had a window that looked out into the main corridor, a wide pane of glass that Denny had probably used to watch for shoplifters back when there were still shoplifters. I was looking right at it when the figure passed in front of it. It moved slowly and it was the right height, the right build. The gray beard was visible even in the dim corridor light, and the jacket was the same one that Denny was wearing in his photo. It stopped just past the window and then slowly, it turned its head toward me. Its eyes found mine through the glass. I've tried a lot of times since that night to describe what was wrong with its face, and the best that I can do is this. It looked like somebody had assembled it carefully from the right pieces and then gotten the timing slightly off. The proportions were correct, but something about the way that it held itself, the way that its face settled into an expression, it was wrong in a way that went past wrong into something that made my whole nervous system light up at once. It looked at me through the window, and I looked back. I thought about his rules. I ran through all 7 of them in my head one by one, and I understood them differently than I had before. Each one was a wall against a specific kind of movement. Don't follow the music, don't approach the child, don't follow the smell. Don't go into the dark wing. Don't follow the laughter from the arcade. Each one existed because the hollow, whatever it was, whatever lived beneath this building in the old limestone dark, understood exactly how humans were built, and to use that knowledge the way that you use a key. It found the door in you that matched the key that it had, and it turned it. It couldn't reach up and take anyone. I was certain of that. It could only lead. It could only pull. Every lure that it made required you to walk toward it on your own 2 feet, and the rules existed to keep you from doing that. I went through all 7 and then I noticed something cold and simple. None of the rules had addressed the door. There was nothing in Denny's list about what to do if something knocked. The thing outside my window raised its hand and it knocked on the glass. 3 times, slow and deliberate. I held very still. It knocked again. It watched me with that slightly off face and the eyes that were almost right. I thought about Denny. 6 years that he had worked here. 6 years of following those rules and building that list, adding to it every time he found a new edge of the thing's territory. 6 years of knowing that it was under this building, and that it was patient and that it would never stop. And at the end of those 6 years, his car was in the parking lot and he was somewhere else, not somewhere that I could find him. I thought about what that meant, and then I sat in the security office with my hands flat on the desk, and I watched the thing that looked like Denny knock on my window, and I did not open the door. It knocked for a long time. It tried the handle twice. It stood at the window and watched me with its assembled face and its eyes, and I sat across from it and watched it back, and neither of us moved. Somewhere around 5 in the morning, the light had started to change. Not fast, just gradually, the way it does in February when dawn comes reluctant and gray. The skylights above began to show the first thin light. The thing outside the window stopped knocking. It stood there for a minute or two just watching me, and then it turned and walked away down the corridor toward the south end of the mall, and I watched it until it was out of sight. I stayed in the office until I heard my friend's truck in the parking lot. He jumped the car and I thanked him, and I drove home and I slept for about 10 hours. When I woke up, it was dark again, and I lay in bed for a while thinking about what I was going to do. I mean, I needed the job, that was still true. Nothing about the previous night had changed that particular fact of my life. I lay there and I did the math that I had already done a dozen times, and I came to the same answer that I always came to. I went back. Bev was doing paperwork when I came in. She handed me a coffee without being asked and went back to her papers. I went to the security desk and started my pre-shift checks the way that I always did. I don't know exactly why I looked at that corkboard again, maybe just out of habit. I had looked at it every shift since I had found that 1988 photo, always half expecting to see something different. And this time something was different. There was a new photo pinned near the top. It was a wide shot of the main corridor in what looked like a busy afternoon, sometime in the late 80s, based on the clothes and the storefronts. Dozens of people moving through the mall in both directions, the fountain running, the carousel spinning. I almost moved on, and then I looked at the background. Near the fountain, barely visible behind a group of teenagers, was a figure standing completely still while everybody around them moved. Modern jacket, modern work boots, a flashlight clipped to his belt. It was me. I looked at the date printed on the bottom edge of the photo. April 1988. I've thought about it every night since. I think about the thing that looked like Denny knocking on the glass while I held still and counted until dawn. I think about what that photo means. Whether it's a thread or a record or just the hollow showing me that it's patient. That it measures time differently than I do. That 6 years or 30 years or 100 years are all the same distance from where it waits. I still follow the rules, all 7 of them, every night without exception. I just added one more. Rule 8. If something knocks, do not open the door.